My phone rang at 11 at night, and the voice on the other end didn't sound like my son-in-law at all. "Mrs. Denzel, I need you to come meet me. Tonight. Please don't bring Delphine and don't tell her I called. My name is Yolanda Denzel, and at 68 years old, I have buried a husband, raised 2 daughters alone, and learned the hard way that nothing good ever comes from a phone call after 10 o'clock. It had only been a month since Delphine's wedding, and I still had thank you cards from the reception sitting unfinished on my kitchen table. But there was something in Conrad's voice that night, a tightness, like a man choosing his words the way you choose your steps on ice, that pulled me out of bed before I even decided to go. If you're watching this tonight, tell me in the comments what time it is, where you are, because where I'm from, 11 at night is when bad news comes knocking. I asked him what this was about. He said he couldn't say it over the phone. I asked him if Delphine was all right. He said yes, quickly, too quickly. The kind of quick that doesn't comfort you, it just tells you the question scared him. "Where are you?" I asked. He gave me an address on the other side of Memphis, near the old warehouses by the river, a part of town I hadn't had reason to visit in years. I told him that was strange. And for half a second, the line went quiet. Then he laughed, soft, controlled, the kind of laugh a man gives when he wants you to think he's not afraid. "I just didn't want anyone seeing us talk, Mrs. Denzel. Not yet." I should have asked him why. I should have asked him a dozen things. Instead, I found myself pulling my robe off the hook and reaching for my car keys, because in 18 years of knowing Conrad Ezel, 18 years of him handling Theodore's contracts, then mine, then everything our family touched on paper, I had never once heard him sound unsure of himself. Not when his own father passed. Not when he stood up in that courtroom for Theodore's business partner. Not even at his own wedding to my daughter, when most grooms shake. He sounded unsure now. I drove with the radio off, my hands tight on the wheel, running through every version of bad news a person can imagine at that hour. Sickness, money, another woman, trouble with the law. None of them fit him. Conrad was careful, measured. The kind of man who read a contract twice before he signed his own name to it. When I pulled up, he was already standing outside his car, arms crossed, watching the road behind me like he was checking whether I'd been followed. That should have told me something too. "Thank you for coming," he said, and opened my car door himself, the way he always did. Polite as ever. Too polite, maybe, for a man who'd just dragged his wife's mother out at midnight. I asked him straight out what was going on. He looked at me for a long moment like a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't take back once he said it out loud. "Mrs. Denzel," he said quietly, "before I show you this, I need you to know I've gone back and forth on telling you for almost 2 weeks. He didn't answer me right away. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, turning it over in his hand like it weighed more than it should. 2 weeks ago, he said. I was at the house dropping off papers for Delphine. I heard voices upstairs, hers and Roxanne's. I wasn't trying to listen, Mrs. Denzel. I want you to know that. I told him to just show me whatever it was. I didn't have patience for the long way around bad news, not at midnight, not standing outside a car in a part of town I didn't know. He pressed the screen and turned it toward me. The video was short, and the light was bad. The kind of dim upstairs hallway lighting that swallows half a face. I heard Roxanne's voice first, sharp, words clipped close together. Then Delphine's, lower, saying something about the house and before she changes her mind again. The audio cut in and out like the phone had been in a pocket, not held steady. I heard one of them say my name. I heard Delphine say, "She won't even know what's happening until it's already done." I don't remember if I made a sound. I remember the phone shaking and realizing it was my own hand doing it, not his. I almost didn't bring this to you, Conrad said, his voice dropping like a man confessing something shameful. I kept telling myself I misheard it. I told myself it was nothing. But it's been 2 weeks, Mrs. Denzel, and I haven't slept right since. I asked him to play it again. He did, slower this time, narrating the parts that blurred. That's Roxanne saying she's tired of waiting. That's Delphine talking about the house, filling in the gaps the bad audio left behind, gently, like he was protecting me from having to strain for it myself. I stood there in that empty lot with my own daughter's voices ringing in my ears, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something in my chest crack clean down the middle. Not anger yet, just disbelief, the kind that hollows you out before the anger even has room to arrive. Why didn't you bring this to them? I asked him. Why not go to Delphine first? She's your wife. He looked down at the phone, then back up at me, and for a second, something in his face looked almost tired. The way a man looks when he's been carrying something heavier than he let on. Because I don't know how she'd take it if I confronted her wrong, he said. If I came at her and I was even a little off about what I heard, she'd never forgive me for accusing her. And if I said nothing and let this go on, and you found out later that I knew... He stopped, shook his head. I couldn't live with you finding out I'd stayed quiet, Mrs. Denzel. Not after everything your husband did for me. Not after everything you've both been to me. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just stood there, looking at a man I had trusted with contracts, with funerals, with my husband's whole life's work, and wondering how two people I had raised with my own 2 hands could sit in a hallway and talk about me like that. I need to think, I finally said. He nodded slowly, like he understood, like he wasn't relieved at all that I hadn't asked him a single question about why the recording started exactly when it did. Roxanne called me 3 days later, asking if I wanted to come to Sunday dinner like we always did. I told her I wasn't feeling up to it. That was a lie, and it came easier than I expected. The truth was, I'd been sitting with that video in my head every hour since the parking lot, replaying Delphine's voice saying I wouldn't even know what was happening until it was already done. I couldn't sit across a table from her and pass the greens like nothing was wrong. I couldn't look at Roxanne and pretend I hadn't heard her say she was tired of waiting. So I stayed home. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I needed rest. Delphine called twice that week. I let both calls go to voicemail, then called back hours later with some excuse about errands, about my hip acting up, about anything that wasn't the real reason. She didn't push. She never pushes. That used to comfort me about my younger daughter, how easy she was, how she never demanded more of my time than I offered. Now I sat with that same ease and wondered if it was something else. Patience, maybe. The patience of someone waiting on a plan to finish itself. Conrad came by that Thursday with papers for me to look over. Something about updating my file, he said, nothing urgent. He sat at my kitchen table the way he always had, easy and familiar. And halfway through pouring my coffee, he mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd heard them again. Heard who? I asked, though I already knew. Delphine and Roxanne. On the phone Tuesday? He didn't look up from the papers. I wasn't trying to hear it, Mrs. Denzel. Roxanne said something about timing, about waiting until after some appointment of yours. I didn't ask what appointment. I knew exactly what appointment he meant. The hip specialist I'd seen that very Tuesday. The one Roxanne had asked about because she always asks about my appointments. Every single one has for years. But standing in my kitchen with that video still fresh in my chest, the same ordinary concern sounded like something else entirely. Like timing, like a plan being managed around my schedule instead of a daughter checking on her mother. I didn't say any of that to him. I just nodded and let him keep talking about paperwork, about a few signatures he needed before the end of the month, about nothing that mattered as much as the sentence he'd already planted and walked away from like it was nothing. After he left, I sat at that same table for a long time, the coffee going cold in front of me. I picked up my phone twice that evening. Both times, my thumb hovered over Roxanne's name. I wanted to ask her straight out. What appointment? What timing? What was she talking about with her sister on a Tuesday afternoon? I wanted to hear her voice crack with confusion. Or worse, hear it not crack at all. That second thought is what stopped me both times. Because if I called her and she answered easy, calm, like she had nothing to hide, I wouldn't know if that meant she was innocent or if it meant she was good at this. I put the phone down and told myself I'd ask another day when I was ready to hear whatever answer came back. The bank statement came on a Monday, tucked between a church bulletin and a flyer for the senior center, and I almost set it aside without opening it the way I usually did. I don't know what made me open it that day instead of letting it sit on the counter like the others. There, halfway down the page, was a transfer out of my investment account. A number large enough to make me sit down at the kitchen table and read it twice. I didn't recognize it. I tried to place it against anything I'd done that month, any bill, any repair, any gift to the grandchildren, and came up with nothing. Then I remembered the papers. 2 weeks earlier, the same week as my hip appointment, Conrad had come by with a folder of documents he'd said couldn't wait until the following month. There were year-end trust adjustments to complete before a filing deadline, he'd explained, and delaying them could create unnecessary tax complications for the estate. I remembered sitting at this same table, my hip throbbing from the specialist poking and pressing at it that morning, half listening as he flipped through pages and pointed to lines. Just sign here, Mrs. Denzel, and here. I'll make sure everything gets filed on time. I remembered the pen in my hand, the dull ache running down my leg, and how easy it was to sign where he pointed, instead of reading every page the way Theodore always told me to. Theodore used to say, read it twice before you sign it once, no matter who brought it to you. I called Conrad that afternoon and asked him about the transfer. Oh, that, he said easily, as though I'd asked about the weather. That was part of the trust adjustment we discussed before the filing deadline, Mrs. Denzel. We moved a portion of the investment account into the estate's trust structure for tax purposes. You signed the authorization the same day as your hip appointment, remember? I walked you through it. I didn't remember him walking me through anything. I remembered signing where he pointed. I don't recall the details, I said. That's all right. That's what I'm here for. You don't need to carry all that in your head. That's my job. He laughed softly, the same warm laugh I'd heard for 18 years whenever I asked a question I thought I should already know the answer to. Theodore used to say the same thing to me. Let Conrad handle the headache, Yolanda. That's why we keep him around. It should have comforted me. For 18 years, it always had. I told him I just wanted to understand it better, and he said he'd come by Thursday with the paperwork again, walk me through it line by line if it would ease my mind. He sounded so unbothered, so willing, that I felt almost foolish for calling at all. Thursday came, and he sat at my table again with that same folder, flipping it open with the same practiced ease he always carried. A man who had read more of my family's paperwork than I had in my own life. Halfway through his explanation, his phone buzzed against the table, the screen lighting up just long enough for me to catch a name I didn't recognize before he turned it face down in one smooth motion. Sorry about that, he said. Work. You know how it is. I did know how it was. 18 years of knowing exactly how it was. But I sat there watching his hand rest on top of that phone, And for the first time since the night in that parking lot, I wondered what else, in 18 years, I had never once thought to ask him to explain twice. Roxanne showed up on a Saturday without calling first, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager sneaking back into the house past curfew. "You've been avoiding us," she said, standing on my porch with her arms crossed, not unkind, just direct the way she'd always been. "3 weeks now, Mama. Delphine thinks it's her. I think it's something else." I let her in because I didn't know how not to. We sat in the front room, and she watched me the way she used to watch me when I was sick and trying to hide it from her as a girl, like she could see straight through whatever I was holding back. "Is it your hip?" she asked. "Is it money? You'd tell me if something was wrong, right?" I almost laughed and almost cried, both at once. I didn't plan what I said next. It came out before I could stop it. "Has anything been going on?" I said, careful, watching her face closely. "Around the wedding month? Anything you and Delphine talked about that maybe you didn't think to bring to me?" I watched her face for the crack. I watched for the hesitation, the flicker, the thing that would have told me the video was true. Instead, her eyebrows pulled together, confused, almost hurt. "The wedding month? Mama, what are you talking about?" "We were planning a wedding. We were arguing about flowers and whether Delphine's dress needed altering again. What else would there be?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "I just wondered." "You just wondered." She repeated it slowly, like she was turning the words over, trying to find the shape of what I wasn't saying. "Mama, you've never just wondered anything in your life. You ask a question. You've already got 3 reasons for asking it." I didn't answer that. I picked at the hem of my sleeve and looked anywhere but at her. "Is this about money?" she pressed. "Did somebody tell you something about me and Delphine? Because if somebody's been in your ear—" "No one's been in my ear," I said, too fast, and I heard how it sounded the moment it left my mouth. She sat back, studying me the way she used to study a patient's chart before she'd commit to a diagnosis. And for a long moment, neither of us said anything. "Mama," she finally said, her voice dropping into something quieter, something that cracked just slightly at the edges. "Whatever this is, wherever it's coming from, I need you to know something. I'd never hurt you. Not over money, not over a house, not over anything. You raised us better than that. And even if you hadn't, I love you too much to ever be the reason you sat in this house, feeling the way you look right now." I looked at my daughter's face, open, wounded, nothing guarded in it at all. And I thought about the blurred hallway light, the voices cutting in and out, Conrad's steady narration filling in every gap I couldn't quite hear for myself. 2 things couldn't both be true. And sitting there, I no longer knew which one wasn't. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was still in my robe, drinking coffee at the same table where Conrad had signed his name to so many years of my family's business. "Mrs. Denzel, this is Patricia Calloway from First Heritage Bank, Fraud Prevention Department. Do you have a few minutes?" I told her I did, though something in the way she said fraud prevention made my stomach drop before she'd said another word. "We're calling about some activity on your investment account," she said. "Over the last 2 months, we've seen 3 transfers that don't match your typical pattern. Larger amounts, moved into an account we don't have on file as a regular recipient. I wanted to confirm with you directly whether you authorized these." I asked her how much we were talking about. She told me, and I had to set my coffee cup down before my hand started shaking too badly to hold it. It was more than the 1 transfer I'd already questioned Conrad about. There were 2 others I hadn't even noticed, buried in statements I'd glanced at and set aside the way I always had, trusting that whatever moved through those accounts moved through them because Conrad had already looked at it first. I don't, I started, then stopped myself, because I genuinely didn't know what was true anymore. I authorized one transfer, I believe, an estate adjustment. I'm not certain about the others. Can you tell me who normally manages these accounts for you, Mrs. Denzel? Do you handle them yourself, or does someone assist you? I thought about 18 years of folders on my kitchen table, 18 years of let Conrad handle the headache, 18 years of signing where he pointed, because Theodore himself had taught me to trust him that much. My son-in-law, I said slowly. He's been our family's attorney for a long time. He's helped manage things since my husband passed. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that isn't empty, the kind where someone on the other end is choosing their next words carefully. I see, Patricia said. And does he have account access? Meaning, is he listed as an authorized signer, or does he simply advise you on these matters? I didn't actually know the answer to that. In 18 years, I had never once asked the difference. I'd have to check, I admitted. That's all right. I want to ask you something else, and I need you to think carefully before you answer, because it matters for how we move forward from here. Her voice had gone careful now, deliberate, the way a doctor's voice goes, right before delivering something you don't want to hear. Mrs. Denzel, do you currently have someone managing your accounts on your behalf? My son-in-law assists with my accounts, I told Patricia, choosing the word carefully. I wouldn't say someone manages them for me without my knowledge. Understood. I do want to mention, since he's listed as an authorized signer, our system automatically sent a routine alert to everyone on that list when the transaction was first flagged, before you and I ever spoke. That's separate from what I'm about to offer you now. I can also open a private trace on these transactions if you request it. That part stays between you and the bank and wouldn't go to any other authorized signer, including him. I told her yes. Trace it. I didn't tell her why my voice had gone flat and careful, why I wasn't asking the questions a worried woman should be asking. Was my money safe? Was someone stealing from me? Should I call the police? I asked her instead how long a trace would take and whether Conrad would be notified about this second request specifically. No, she said. This trace stays between you and the bank. He may already know about the original flag since that alert went out automatically. But he won't know you've asked us to dig further. Good, I said, and I heard myself say it before I'd fully decided I meant it. After we hung up, I sat at the table for a long time before I pulled out an old notebook I'd used years ago for grocery lists and church committee notes, and I started writing down dates. The night in the parking lot. The signature week. The same week as my hip appointment. The phone call from Roxanne about timing that Conrad had twisted into something it wasn't. The first transfer I'd questioned him about. I wrote them all down in a column, plain as I could, and stared at how close some of them sat to each other. I didn't know yet what I was building. I only knew that for the first time since that night across town, I wasn't sitting still, waiting for someone else to hand me the next piece. Conrad came by that evening, unannounced, with a small gift bag, a candle, something Delphine had picked out, he said, thinking of me. We sat in the front room and talked about nothing much. The grandchildren, a church anniversary coming up, his work slowing down some now that a few cases had closed. Then, halfway through a sentence about something else entirely, he said it so casually I almost missed it. Oh. I meant to tell you, I handled a little banking issue for you earlier this week. Nothing to worry about. Just some flag the system kicked up on one of the transfers. I called and got it sorted. I kept my face still. I'd learned in just a few short weeks how to do that. What kind of flag? I asked, my voice as light as I could make it. Routine stuff, he said, waving a hand. Banks get jumpy about big transfers sometimes. I told them I handle your estate matters and it cleared right up. He smiled, easy as ever. You don't need to think twice about it. I smiled back at him, and underneath the smile, my mind moved fast and cold and clear for the first time in weeks. He knew about the first flag. That much, Patricia had already explained, was simply how the system worked. But I had asked for something else entirely less than 6 hours ago, something that was supposed to stay between me and the bank alone. And watching him sip his coffee like a man with nothing at all to hide, I found myself wondering, for the first time, whether there was a difference between what he knew and what he was pretending not to know. Delphine called me on a Sunday afternoon, her voice lighter than I'd heard it in weeks. And for a moment, I let myself believe things between us were settling back into something normal. Conrad surprised me, she said, half laughing. Traded. In his old car for something nicer. I told him we didn't need it. But you know how he gets when he wants to treat me. I asked her what kind of car, keeping my voice easy, the way you ask about weather or church service. She told me. And the number she mentioned when I pressed her about the price, casually, the way a mother asks about her daughter's life, sat heavy in my chest long after we hung up. And get this, she added, still laughing, still light, still no idea what each word was doing to me. He's been talking about a second property, something for investment, he says. I told him to slow down, but he says business has just been good lately. I told her that was wonderful. I told her I was happy for them. I don't know how I made my voice sound the way it needed to sound, warm and unbothered, while my mind was already running ahead of the conversation to a notebook sitting on my kitchen table. After we hung up, I went straight to it. I found the date of the transfer I'd questioned weeks ago, the one Conrad called an estate adjustment. The one he said I'd authorized the same week as my hip appointment. I found the date of the second transfer, the one Patricia had mentioned larger than the first, the one I hadn't even noticed until the bank flagged it. I sat with my notebook and a calendar I kept by the phone, and I worked backward from what Delphine had just told me. I didn't know the exact day he'd bought the car, but I knew it was recent. Within the last month, she'd said, maybe less. And the second transfer, the larger one, had cleared my account only 11 days before that call. 11 days. I sat there doing the kind of math a woman doesn't want to be doing about her own daughter's husband, turning the numbers over, looking for some other explanation, some way the dates could simply be coincidence. Maybe he'd saved for months. Maybe the money had nothing to do with my accounts at all. Maybe I was an old woman seeing shapes in shadows where there weren't any. But Theodore used to say money doesn't lie, even when people do. Numbers don't get nervous. Numbers don't soften an explanation to make you feel better. Numbers just sit there, plain as they are, waiting for somebody to finally look at them straight on. I looked at them straight on that night. The 11 days between a transfer I never fully approved and a car my daughter was so happy to tell me about. And I understood, sitting alone at my kitchen table with the lamp burning low, that I could no longer call this a feeling. It was a pattern, and patterns don't happen by accident. Patricia called me back on a Wednesday, and the moment she said my name, I could tell she'd found something. Mrs. Denzel, I want to walk you through this carefully, so bear with me. Papers shuffled on her end of the line. The transfers in question were routed through an LLC called SIL Estate Management Services. I sat very still. Conrad's firm, I said. That's what our records indicate, yes. Here's what's important for you to understand. This account wasn't new, and it wasn't hidden. It's been on file with your accounts for years as an approved recipient for legal fees related to your estate matters. That's why the earlier transactions never triggered concern. What drew our attention this time was the change in pattern. The recent transfers were significantly larger than the amounts that had historically moved to that account. So he used the same account, I said slowly, that he's always used to bill me. Based on the records we have, yes. I thought of every check I'd signed without question, every invoice I'd never once asked him to itemize. Because why would I? Conrad had handled Theodore's affairs since before some of these accounts even existed. He'd built that trust, one polite, competent year at a time, and somewhere inside the comfort of all that history, the same account I'd trusted for years had become the one now sitting at the center of every question. What happens now? I asked. That's your decision. My role is to explain what we've found. Whether you choose to escalate this formally, speak with Mr. Ezel, or involve law enforcement is entirely up to you. From a fraud prevention standpoint, though, I'd recommend making sure your remaining assets are protected before confronting anyone who currently has authorized access to your accounts. I thanked her, and we hung up. I sat in my kitchen with the phone still warm in my hand, staring at nothing. 18 years. 18 years of folders. 18 years of let Conrad handle the headache. 18 years of an account I'd never once asked to see itemized, because asking had felt almost insulting to a man who'd buried himself in paperwork for this family since before his wedding to my daughter was ever a thought in anyone's mind. My first instinct was to call Roxanne. My thumb was already moving toward her name before I'd fully decided to do it. Some old, deep need to hear another voice that loved me. Say something steady. Something true. I stopped myself before the call connected. If I told Roxanne now, with nothing but the bank's findings and a notebook full of dates, it would become a story before it ever became proof. It would turn into accusations flying across a family dinner table, into Delphine standing between her husband and her mother with no clear evidence in either hand, into a mess no one could walk back from cleanly. I needed more than suspicion this time. I needed something Conrad couldn't explain away. I went into the bank in person the next morning, dressed like I was going to church, because I wanted Patricia to look at me and see a woman who knew exactly what she was asking for. She met me at a small desk near the back, away from the tellers, and listened while I told her plainly what I wanted. A hold. On every transaction tied to Conrad's access, on every account he could touch, effective immediately. I want to be clear about what I'm requesting, I said. I'm not asking you to investigate him yet. I'm asking you to stop anything else from moving until I understand what's already moved. Patricia nodded, already pulling up something on her screen. Tennessee has protections in place for situations exactly like this, Mrs. Denzel. Once an account holder reports suspected financial exploitation, we're permitted to place a hold on suspicious activity without notifying the person under suspicion. The law exists specifically, so a vulnerable account holder isn't tipped off against, meaning the person we're protecting isn't put in danger by alerting whoever might be taking advantage. And he won't know, I said. Not from your end. Not from our end. The hold goes into effect today. Any further transfers tied to his access will be blocked and will flag anything that tries to move through that LLC account going forward. She looked up at me, something gentler in her face now. I want you to know, this is the right step. A lot of people in your position wait too long because they're afraid of what it means about the person they trusted. You didn't wait. I didn't tell her how many weeks I had already spent waiting, turning it over, hoping for some explanation that didn't make a monster out of a man I'd watch stand up at my husband's funeral and speak like he'd lost a father of his own. I signed what needed signing, and I drove home with my hands steadier on the wheel than they'd been in a month. For the first time since that parking lot, I felt something besides fear sitting in my chest. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was something quieter than that. The feeling of a door finally closing on one side of a house, even while the rest of it still stood wide open. That evening, my phone rang, and Conrad's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer. Then I did, because not answering would have told him something was wrong before I was ready for him to know it. Mrs. Denzel? His voice came through bright, easy, nothing in it pulled tight the way it had been that first night across town. I was thinking, could I swing by this weekend? Go over a few estate documents with you? Nothing major. Just some things I'd like to tidy up before the end of the month. I sat very still, listening to a man who had no idea, not even the smallest flicker of suspicion, that the account he'd used for 18 years had already been quietly shut. Of course, I told him, my voice as warm and unbothered as his own. This weekend works fine. The consultant's name was Marcia Beaumont, a small, precise woman Patricia had recommended, someone who'd spent 20 years untangling exactly this kind of mess for families who didn't know who to trust anymore. I sat across from her in a quiet office downtown and laid out everything: the bank's trace, the LLC, the dates I'd written in my notebook. Then, after a long pause, I told her about the video. I hadn't planned to mention it, but watching her work through the financial trail with such calm certainty, I found myself wanting someone, finally, to look at the other thing too, the thing that had started all of this, the thing I'd been carrying alone since that parking lot. She asked whether I had a copy. I didn't. Conrad had only played it from his own phone that night and never offered to send it to me. When I later asked Delphine whether Conrad had ever backed up his phone, she remembered something I'd never paid attention to before. Months earlier, after replacing his phone, he'd enabled automatic cloud backups to a shared family storage account so they wouldn't lose old photos and videos. Delphine still had access to it. It took Marcia less than an hour to locate the file among hundreds of ordinary recordings. She called me back 3 days later. Mrs. Denzel, I need to walk you through this carefully. Papers shuffled softly on her desk. The financial trail is exactly what the bank described. The transfers, the LLC, the dates. They all line up. From what I've reviewed, that evidence is solid. And the video? She was quiet for a moment. I don't believe you're looking at one recording. What do you mean? The audio contains edits. There are abrupt waveform changes and compression differences that shouldn't exist in a continuous recording. I can't tell you why someone edited it yet, but I can tell you it wasn't preserved in its original form. I closed my eyes. So, it was altered. Yes. And once I compared it against the backup files in the cloud account, it became much clearer. She paused before continuing. The conversation about the wedding seating is real. That's where you heard someone say, before she changes her mind again. But they weren't talking about you. They were talking about Delphine's mother-in-law changing the guest count. My grip tightened around the phone. The rest comes from older recordings, Marcia continued. Conversations from months apart. One discussion involved your husband's estate, where both daughters were frustrated and venting about waiting for financial decisions. Those clips were lifted out of their original context and placed beside the wedding conversation to create something that never actually happened. I sat there without speaking. Every Sunday dinner I'd skipped, every call I'd let ring unanswered, every hour I'd spent doubting two daughters who had never given me a real reason to. There is one more thing, Marcia said gently. I examined the file history itself. I braced myself. The metadata preserved in the cloud backup shows the original recording dates for each clip. It also shows when the edited version was first created. Tell me. He assembled the final video 3 days before the wedding. I didn't answer. For the first time since that night in the parking lot, I understood that none of this had happened by impulse. It had been planned. I asked them both to come to the house on a Sunday, and I didn't tell either of them why. Roxanne arrived first, still in her work clothes, scanning my face the way she always did when something felt off. Delphine came 20 minutes later, looser, easier. No idea yet that the floor was about to drop out from under her marriage. I sat them down in the front room and told them everything. I started with the night across town, the video, the words I thought I'd heard. I watched Roxanne's face go from confusion to something sharper, something that looked almost like recognition, like pieces she hadn't known were missing were finally sliding into place. I watched Delphine's face do something else entirely, go pale, then very still, the stillness of someone already running ahead to a conclusion she didn't want to reach. I told them about the bank, the transfers, the LLC with Conrad's name on it. I told them about the hold. And then, because I owed it to her more than I'd owed anyone anything in a long time, I turned to Roxanne directly. I need to say something to you, and I need you to hear all of it. My voice shook, but I kept going. For 3 months, I pulled away from you. I let you stand on my porch and tell me you'd never hurt me, and I still went home that night and wasn't sure I believed you. I missed dinners. I missed phone calls. I let a lie cost us something I can't get back, and I did it to you specifically, Roxanne, not to some idea of you, to you. I'm sorry. I was wrong to let it go on as long as I did, and I should have come to you the moment something felt off instead of carrying it alone. Roxanne didn't say anything for a long moment. Her eyes were wet, but her voice, when it came, was steady. You should have come to me, Mama. But I understand why you didn't. He's good. He's always been good at sounding like the only honest one in the room. Delphine made a small sound beside her, almost a laugh, except nothing about it was funny. 18 years, she said quietly. 18 years of him sitting in this house, and I never once. She stopped, pressed her hand over her mouth, and when she spoke again, her voice had gone hard in a way I'd never heard from my younger daughter. He filmed us. He took something we said about flowers and turned it into something that made you afraid of us. He let you sit alone for months, hurting, because of something he built with his own 2 hands. Delphine, I said carefully, watching something settle behind her eyes that worried me. I need you to stay calm right now. We have proof. We have the bank. We have Marcia's report. We have all of it ready to move on properly. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. I'm going to go talk to him, she said. Tonight. Delphine, wait. But she was already reaching for her keys, her face set in a way that told me no amount of careful planning was going to hold her back tonight. Delphine called me an hour later, her voice trembling in a way that told me the conversation with Conrad hadn't gone the way either of them expected. He didn't deny it, Mama. Not really. He kept saying there were explanations, that I was jumping to conclusions, that everything would make sense if we just sit down and go through the paperwork together. She paused. Then he started talking about how complicated everything is, how I wouldn't understand the pressure he's been under. Her voice broke. I told him I knew about the hold. I shouldn't have told him that. I wasn't thinking. I felt the floor shift under me. Delphine, where is he now? He left. I don't know where he went. I knew where he went before my doorbell rang 20 minutes later. He stood on my porch without the easy smile I'd known for 18 years, a folder clutched in his hand, his shirt collar slightly open. He still looked like Conrad, composed, professional, every bit the attorney I'd trusted. But there was something different in his eyes, something restless that hadn't been there before. Mrs. Denzel, we need to talk. His voice was calm, almost reassuring, though I could hear the strain underneath it. There's been a misunderstanding with the accounts. I can straighten this out, but I need you to sign something tonight. I didn't move from the doorway. What kind of something, Conrad? He stepped into the front room after I moved aside, setting the folder on the same table where he'd sat for nearly 2 decades. He opened it carefully, laying the papers flat as though this were any ordinary meeting. It's a temporary transfer of the Elmwood property into a protective trust, he said. Only until the bank finishes reviewing everything. Once this is over, it can all be transferred back. I'm trying to keep your assets from getting caught up if the review expands. You're trying to move my house, I said slowly, into something with your name attached to it, while a bank investigation is already underway. His expression barely changed. It's not like that. Then explain it to me plainly, the way you always have. No folders, no signatures, just words. For a moment, he tried. You've trusted me for 18 years, he said quietly. I've protected this family's interest longer than Delphine and I have even been married. One misunderstanding shouldn't erase all of that. It wasn't one misunderstanding, I said. It was 3 transfers, an edited video, and paperwork you wanted me to sign without asking enough questions. Something shifted across his face. Not anger at first. Resignation. You don't understand what I've done for this family, he said, his voice tightening. I built your husband's estate plan from nothing. I sat in rooms with lawyers twice my age and made sure nothing slipped through the cracks for 30 years of work he built. I handled every contract, every dispute, every late-night call when something fell apart, and I never once sent you a bill that reflected what that was actually worth. So, you decided to take it instead of asking. His composure finally gave way. I decided, he said, his voice cracking now, that nobody in this family was ever going to pay me what I was worth. Every year, it was another favor, another emergency, another promise we'd settle things later. He took one slow step toward me. You have no idea what I gave this family for 18 years, and nobody ever thought to ask what it cost me. For the first time since I'd known him, I felt something like fear standing in my own front room, not because he was shouting, but because the man I'd trusted for nearly 2 decades had finally stopped pretending he believed he was innocent. I didn't answer him. I reached into my cardigan pocket, where I'd kept my phone since the moment Delphine called to tell me he'd left her place upset, and dialed the direct number Marcia had given me days earlier. The investigator assigned to the case after the bank referred its findings. He came, I said quietly, never taking my eyes off Conrad. He's at my house right now, and he's asking me to sign more documents. The investigator's voice stayed calm. Don't argue with him. Don't sign anything. Keep him there if you safely can. We're already nearby. I ended the call. Conrad's expression shifted, the anger draining into something closer to disbelief. What are you doing? What I should have done weeks ago, I said. He looked at the folder still lying open on my table, at the unsigned page waiting for my name, and I watched him calculate, the way he always calculated, searching for the angle that would put him back in control. There wasn't one left. A few minutes later, headlights swept across my front window, not flashing, not loud, just 2 plain sedans pulling quietly into the driveway. Marcia had explained days earlier that once the bank completed its referral and I agreed to cooperate, investigators had opened a formal case. They'd also warned me that if Conrad realized his access to the accounts had changed, he might try to persuade me to sign additional paperwork before he understood exactly what was happening. If that happened, I was to call immediately and let them handle the rest. Tonight, apparently, was exactly what they'd been preparing for. 2 investigators came to my door, calm and professional, asking for Conrad Ezel by his full name before stepping inside. He stood very still in my front room, the folder forgotten on the table, his eyes moving from them to me, as though he still couldn't believe the woman who had signed wherever he pointed for 18 years was now the one who had made the call. "Mr. SIL," one of the investigators said, "we're with the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. We'd like you to come with us regarding an active investigation into suspected financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and falsified estate documents." "Active investigation?" Conrad repeated quietly. "It was opened several weeks ago." For the first time since he'd walked through my front door, he had nothing to say. He didn't argue. He didn't reach for the folder. He simply stood there while the investigators advised him of the next steps and escorted him outside. I heard another car door close and turn toward the porch. Delphine stood just beyond the light, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Roxanne was beside her, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. Neither of them spoke, as Conrad was led toward the waiting sedan. The night stayed almost unnaturally quiet, broken only by the investigators' low voices and the soft click of a car door closing. Delphine watched until the sedan disappeared down the street. Then she turned toward me, her face calm in a way that frightened me more than tears ever could. "I want a divorce," she said quietly. Conrad was formally charged 6 weeks later, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery, and 3 counts tied to falsified estate documents. Marcia told me the financial trail alone would have been enough, but the video, once the full footage surfaced, made it impossible for anyone to call this a misunderstanding between family. The prosecutor's office said it was one of the cleaner cases they'd seen in years, every date lining up, every transfer traceable, every lie sitting right where he'd left it. I hired a new attorney to handle the estate, a woman named Carla Whitfield, who insisted on itemized statements and quarterly reviews. The kind of oversight I should have asked for 18 years earlier, back when trust still felt like enough on its own. She helped me recover most of what could be recovered. Not all of it, but enough. Delphine's divorce moved quickly, cleaner than either of us expected. No children to untangle, no shared property beyond what the courts were already sorting out as part of the larger case against him. She moved back into her old apartment for a while, then eventually bought a small house of her own, something with her name on the deed and no one else's. She came by most Sundays now, the way she used to before any of this started. So did Roxanne. We sat at the same kitchen table where Conrad had once spread his folders out so easily, and for a long time, none of us talked about him at all. We talked about Roxanne's promotion at the hospital. We talked about Delphine's garden, the tomatoes she couldn't keep the rabbits away from. We talked about nothing important, the way families are supposed to be able to talk, without anyone managing the conversation toward an angle. One Sunday, Roxanne asked me, gently, how I was really doing. Not the answer I gave most people, but the truth. I told her I'd spent a long time in this house feeling like I'd failed at something basic, something a mother is supposed to know without being told. Who to trust, who not to. I told her I'd replayed that night across town more times than I could count, wondering what I should have asked, what I should have noticed sooner. "You noticed," she said. "It just took you a minute to trust what you were noticing." I sat with that for a while after she left that evening. I walked through the house slower than I used to, past the room that had been Theodore's office, still smelling faintly of the cedar shelves he'd built himself, still holding the chair where he used to sit with his own folders, decades before Conrad ever touched a single one of them. I sat down in that chair for the first time in years. He thought a lie could make me small enough to control. Instead, it taught me exactly how much I was still capable of protecting.